For 230 years, a tiny island off the coast of Nova Scotia has swallowed fortunes, reputations, and 6 human lives, and it has given back almost nothing except more questions. Kings have been rumored to be buried in it, pirates, knights, the lost manuscripts of Shakespeare. 6 men have died trying to reach the bottom of a single hole in the ground, and every single expedition that got close was stopped by the same thing: water, rushing in from nowhere, on demand, as if the island itself decided that today was not the day. People have called it the greatest treasure hunt in history and the greatest hoax in history in the same breath. And for most of your life, the honest answer to what is down there has been 3 words: nobody actually knows. I need you to hear this next part clearly, because I am not going to waste your time, and I am not going to bait you with a title I can't back up. The mystery of the Oak Island Money Pit has, for the first time in 2 centuries, actually been cracked. Not with a legend, not with a psychic. With core samples, carbon dating, sonar, seismic scans, and a lead cross pulled out of the mud that should not exist. And here is the part that genuinely surprised me when I put all of it together. The answer is not pirate gold. It is not a chest of coins. What the evidence now points to is bigger, older, and frankly more valuable than any pile of treasure the pirates could have left. And by the end of this video, I am going to show you exactly what it is and exactly how they figured it out. So stick with me, because I am going to walk you through the whole thing in order. The discovery, the curse, the theories, the machines, the deaths, and finally the solution. And I promise you the payoff is worth it. Because once you see what was actually engineered into that island, you stop asking, is there treasure down there? You start asking a much scarier question. Who had the money, the manpower, and the reason to build something like this in the middle of nowhere, 300 years before anyone was supposed to be there? Let me set the stage, because the location matters more than people give it credit for. Oak Island is small, about 140 acres, barely a kilometer long, connected to mainland Nova Scotia by a short causeway that wasn't even built until the 1960s. It is not tropical. It is not exotic. It is cold, foggy, covered in, you guessed it, oak trees, which were unusual for that stretch of Canadian coastline and which some people believe were planted deliberately as a marker. If you flew over it, you would never look twice. It looks like 1,000 other forgotten islands scattered along the Atlantic seaboard. And that is exactly the point. Whoever chose this island, if somebody did choose it, chose the most forgettable rock they could find. No harbor town, no settlement, no reason for anyone to dig. For most of recorded history, the only people who set foot on Oak Island were fishermen sheltering from storms. It was the definition of nowhere. Which is why what a 14-year-old boy found there in the summer of 1795 makes so little sense, because the thing he found was not the work of nature and not the work of a lonely fisherman. It was the work of people with engineering, with tools, with a plan, and with a very good reason to make sure no one ever found what they left behind. Hold that thought, a hidden project. On a forgotten island, built by people who knew exactly what they were doing, because it is going to come back at the end and mean something completely different than it does right now. In 1795, a teenager named Daniel McGinnis was wandering the eastern end of the island when he noticed something odd. There was a circular depression in the ground, a shallow saucer-shaped dip in the earth, maybe 10 or 12 feet across, in a clearing surrounded by old oaks. And directly above that depression, hanging from a branch, was an old ship's block and tackle a pulley, the kind of thing you would use to lower something very heavy into the ground, or lift it out. Now put yourself in that boy's shoes. You live in a region soaked in pirate stories. Captain Kidd, Blackbeard, the whole Golden Age fleet is said to have roamed these very waters only decades earlier. And here is a man-made pulley, hanging over a man-made dent in the earth, on an island nobody visits. What do? You go get your friends, and you start to dig. McGinnis came back with 2 other boys, John Smith and Anthony Vaughan, and they started clearing the depression. And this is where the story stops being a boy's adventure and starts being something else entirely. 2 feet down, they hit a layer of flagstones, flat stones that do not naturally occur at that spot on the island, meaning someone carried them there and placed them. They kept digging. The walls of the pit were marked with pickaxe scars, proof that this shaft had been dug before, by hand, by somebody. Then, 10 feet down, they hit a platform of oak logs laid horizontally across the entire width of the shaft, the ends embedded into the clay walls. They pried the logs up and kept going. 20 feet down, another oak platform. 30 feet down, another one. Think about what that means. Every 10 feet, someone had deliberately built a wooden floor and then buried it. That is not how you hide treasure quickly. That is not a pirate burying a chest and running. That is a construction project. Somebody dug this shaft deep, and as they filled it back in, they installed platform after platform after platform, like the floors of a building going down into the earth. The three boys dug until they physically could not go any deeper without equipment, and eventually they stopped, staring down into a black hole that clearly did not end where their strength did. They went home, but they never forgot. And for the next 2 centuries, neither did anyone else. Now, this is the part everyone knows. This is the version in the history books, the tourism brochures, the polite museum plaques. Word got out. Investors formed companies. Over the 1800s, wave after wave of treasure hunting syndicates arrived on Oak Island, convinced that a season of hard work and a good pump would deliver them a pirate's fortune. And on the surface, the story of Oak Island for the next 100 years is just a story of stubborn men digging a very deep hole and going broke. In 1804, a group called the Onslow Company dug down past 90 feet and kept finding those same evenly spaced markers, oak platforms, every 10 feet, and between them, layers that made no sense together. Charcoal, then putty, then a thick layer of coconut fiber. In Nova Scotia, coconuts do not grow within thousands of miles of Oak Island. Someone shipped that fiber in from a tropical latitude by the ton and packed it into a hole in the Canadian coast, the material old sailors used as drainage packing. Somebody was building drainage into this pit on purpose. And then, at around 90 feet, the Onslow Company found the thing that turned Oak Island from a curiosity into a legend. A flat stone, inscribed with strange symbols, a cipher, rows of markings no one could read. According to the accounts, when the symbols were eventually translated, they spelled a sentence, 40 feet below, 2 million pounds are buried. 2 million pounds in today's money, hundreds of millions of dollars. The men dug on, right down to the stone, and the next morning came back to finish the job and found the pit flooded to the 65-foot mark with seawater. They bailed, it refilled, they pumped, it refilled. No matter what they did, the water won. They had to walk away. That is the official story. A deep hole, some clever booby traps, and a lot of men who lost their money. Told like that, it sounds almost mundane, an old-timey get-rich-quick scheme that went bust. But here is where people started asking the questions that the tidy version does not want you to ask. Because that flooding? It was not bad luck. It was not groundwater. It was engineered. When later expeditions investigated why the money pit refused to stay dry, they discovered something that should send a chill down your spine. Nearly 500 feet away, on a beach called Smith's Cove, the natural sand was hiding a structure. Under the beach, workers found layers of that same coconut fiber and eelgrass laid over a bed of flat stones, and beneath that, 5 finger-like drains, box drains, built of carefully fitted rock, all converging like the fingers of a hand toward a single point. From that point, a tunnel ran underground, sloping downward, hundreds of feet, straight to the money pit. Do you understand what that is? Somebody built an artificial beach that functions as a giant filter and funnel. When the tide comes in, seawater is drawn through the fiber, gathered by the 5 drains, channeled into a tunnel, and delivered directly into the treasure shaft. It is a booby trap that runs on the ocean itself, a self-powered defense with no moving parts that can never be turned off as long as the tide keeps rising and falling. Every time treasure hunters got close, they were not fighting nature. They were fighting a piece of hydraulic engineering designed to drown anyone who reached the vault without knowing the secret to shutting it off. So now the questions stack up, and they do not stop. Who has the engineering knowledge to design a tidal flood system? Who has the labor force to dig a shaft over 100 feet deep and tunnel 500 feet through rock and clay to the sea? Who has that kind of money and time and does it in total secrecy, on an island at the edge of the known world, and then vanishes without leaving a single record, a single name, a single map? This was not a pirate in a hurry. Pirates do not build filtration beaches. This was somebody with the resources of a government or an order. And the more you look at who was moving through the Atlantic in the centuries before that boy picked up his shovel, the stranger the list of suspects gets. So let's talk about the suspects, because this is where 200 years of obsession has produced some genuinely wild ideas, and a few that are harder to laugh off than you'd expect. The first and most obvious theory is pirate treasure, the one the boys believed in 1795, and the one that funded most of the early digs. Captain Kidd and Blackbeard both sailed these waters, and legend held that Kidd buried a massive hoard east of Boston before he was captured and hanged. For a lot of people, that was the whole story. A pirate stashed his plunder, rigged a few traps, and died before he could return for it. Clean, simple, satisfying. But it falls apart the moment you look at that engineering. Pirates were violent, opportunistic, and above all, fast. They did not spend years commanding hundreds of laborers to build filtration systems and 100-foot vaults. A pirate hides a chest in an afternoon. Oak Island took an army and an engineer. The second theory goes older and deeper. The Knights Templar. The Templars were a medieval military religious order, fabulously wealthy, who were violently suppressed by the King of France and the Pope in 1307. On a single day, Friday the 13th of October, their leaders were arrested, but their legendary treasure and their sacred relics were never found. Some of their fleet slipped out of port and disappeared. Believers argue the Templars, or their descendants who became the Freemasons, sailed west generations before Columbus and hid their most precious relics somewhere safe, and that Oak Island, with its geometric layout and its stone markers, is a Templar vault. Supporters point to a large boulder cross of stones on the island, and to symbols that resemble Masonic ritual, and they ask a fair question. Why does so much of the money pit structure mirror the initiation imagery of a Masonic degree? The third theory is the most literary, that buried in that shaft are not coins at all, but manuscripts. Some say the original manuscripts of William Shakespeare, hidden by Sir Francis Bacon, who a fringe of scholars believe actually wrote the plays. Others say religious material, even older early Christian scrolls, sacred documents smuggled out of the Holy Land. Remember that coconut fiber, and the putty, and the charcoal layers? Those are not how you protect gold. Gold does not rot. Those are how you protect something fragile, something organic paper, parchment, vellum, that would be destroyed by water and needed to be sealed and preserved for centuries. That detail alone quietly rules out a lot of the treasure theories and points at something a chest of coins would never require. And then there is the fourth theory, the one the skeptics love, the deflating one, that there is nothing down there at all, that the money pit is a natural sinkhole. Nova Scotia sits on soft limestone and gypsum, the kind of bedrock that dissolves and forms underground caverns and sudden vertical shafts. A natural sinkhole could explain the depth. Underground channels to the sea could explain the flooding. The platforms could be logs washed into a natural void. In this version, 200 years of men have died and gone broke chasing a geological accident, seeing engineering where there was only erosion, seeing a curse where there was only bad luck and cold water. I will come back to this theory, because it is the strongest challenge to everything I'm about to show you, and any honest look at Oak Island has to face it head on. But first, we need to talk about the curse, because whatever is down there, it has been asking a price. There is an old legend attached to Oak Island, and it has been repeated for so long that it has taken on a life of its own. The legend says that the treasure will not be found until 7 men have died in the search for it. 7 deaths, and only then will the island give up its secret. For a long time, that was just campfire talk until the deaths started to add up. Over the 2 centuries of digging, 6 men have lost their lives on that island in the pursuit of the money pit. In 1861, during one of the pumping operations, a boiler burst and a worker was scalded to death, the first modern casualty, killed by the very machinery brought in to beat the flood trap. Over the following decades, more followed. Men fell, men were crushed. In 1965, a treasure hunter named Robert Restall, who had devoted his life and his family's savings to the island, was overcome by fumes or gas at the bottom of a shaft and collapsed into the water. His son climbed down to save him and was overcome too. 2 more men who went in after them were overcome as well. When it was over, 4 men were dead in a single afternoon, poisoned by an invisible gas at the bottom of a hole they had spent years trying to reach. That brought the toll toward 6. 6 men. The legend says 7. And that is the detail that hangs over every single modern excavation like a shadow you can't quite shake. Every person who steps onto that island today, every operator who climbs into a caisson and gets lowered into the dark, knows the count. 6 down, 1 to go. It is the kind of story that would be easy to dismiss as superstition, except that the people who work that island are not superstitious people. They are engineers and geologists and heavy equipment operators. And even they, when the topic comes up, get quiet. Because there is something about a place that has taken 6 lives and refused to explain itself that makes even a skeptic lower his voice. The question that keeps the whole thing alive is simple and awful. Does someone still have to die before this is over? Or has the island finally, after all this time, decided to give up the secret instead? Which brings us to now, because for the last decade, the most serious, best-funded, most technologically advanced assault on the Oak Island mystery in its entire history has been underway, and it is the reason I can tell you, honestly, that the answer is finally within reach. 2 brothers from Michigan, Rick and Marty McGinnis, grew up reading about Oak Island in a magazine as kids. Rick became obsessed. Decades later, after Marty had made a fortune in the oil and gas business, the brothers did what most people only fantasize about. They bought a controlling stake in the island itself, assembled a team of surveyors, geologists, historians, divers, and heavy equipment specialists, and threw modern industrial technology at a mystery that had defeated everyone before them. Where the old companies had shovels and hand pumps, the McGinnis brought hydraulic excavators, seismic imaging, sonar, underwater cameras, metal detectors, DNA analysis, and drilling rigs capable of punching down hundreds of feet and pulling up core samples from the depths no human had ever reached. And here is where the escalation begins, because once you apply real science to Oak Island, the finds do not get more boring, they get more impossible. Let me walk you up the staircase the way the evidence actually revealed itself, one step at a time, because no single discovery is the smoking gun. It is the way they stack on top of each other that changes everything. Step 1. The team went back to Smith's Cove, the site of that engineered flood beach, and they excavated it properly with machines. And they found it, the box drains, the layered fiber, the flat stones, exactly as described in the old accounts. But they also found something the old accounts never mentioned. A massive wooden structure buried under the beach, a U-shaped construction of notched logs. And when they sent samples of that wood off to a laboratory for carbon dating, the results came back placing the timber centuries old enough to predate the boys' discovery by a wide margin, old enough to raise the possibility that this construction went back long before the island was ever officially settled. Someone was building industrial-scale wooden works on Oak Island before the history books say anyone was there. Step 2. The coconut fiber. The team took samples of that tropical fiber packed into the flood system and carbon dated it, and the dates came back centuries before 1795, with some results reaching back toward the medieval period. Tropical coconut fiber, shipped by the ton to Nova Scotia, hundreds of years before the pirate era the legend blames. That single result quietly detonates the simple pirate theory and drags the timeline back toward the Templars. Step 3. In a swamp on the island, a triangular swamp that the team's surveys suggested was itself artificial, dug and shaped by human hands, divers and excavators began pulling up objects that had no business being there. Ship's fittings, worked wood, and in the mud, a lead cross. A small hand-cast lead cross, and when its metal was analyzed and traced, the lead was found to match ore from a specific mine in the south of France, a region intimately tied to the Knights Templar, and its style was consistent with the medieval period, centuries before Columbus. A Templar-linked cross, made of French lead, sitting in the mud of a Nova Scotian island. Read that back to yourself. Step 4. The bones. Deep in the core samples pulled up from inside the money pit workings, the team recovered fragments of human bone. They sent them for DNA analysis. The results indicated ancestry that included European and, in one analysis, Middle Eastern origins. Human remains, from people who came from across the ocean, buried deep in the fill of the money pit. Someone died down there, or was placed down there, long ago, and they were not local. Step 5. And this is the one that ties the fragile treasure theory to physical evidence. From deep in a borehole, the team recovered a tiny scrap of parchment sheepskin vellum with what appeared to be handwriting on it, Letters in old ink, parchment, 150 feet underground. The very material you would use to write a document you intended to last for centuries. That scrap is the physical echo of the manuscript theory, pulled up out of the earth in a core sample, and it means that whatever was sealed in that pit, at least some of it was written down. Medieval dated wood. Medieval dated tropical fiber. A French Templar linked lead cross. Human bone with transatlantic DNA. A fragment of handwritten parchment from deep underground. Any one of those, a skeptic can explain away. All five together, in the same place, pointing at the same period and the same story that is not a coincidence anymore. That is a signal. Let me step back and give you the history that makes this fit together, because without it, the finds are just random old objects, and with it, they suddenly form a picture. Go back to 1307. The Knights Templar, the richest and most powerful order in Europe, bankers to kings, are marked for destruction. The King of France, deep in debt to them and hungry for their wealth, conspires with the Pope, and on Friday the 13th of October, the arrests begin across France. But here is the detail that historians actually record and cannot fully explain. When the king's men reached the Templar treasury in Paris and the fleet in the port of La Rochelle, the legendary Templar treasure was gone, and 18 of their ships had slipped out to sea in the night, never to be documented again. An entire fleet, loaded with the wealth and relics of the order, simply vanished from history. Where does a fleet of hunted knights, carrying everything they own and everything they hold sacred, sail when every port in Europe is a death sentence? They sail west, into the open Atlantic, away from the reach of kings. And the descendants of that tradition, the order eventually reborn, some argue, as the stonemasons and Freemasons who carried its rituals and its secrets forward, had the engineering knowledge, the geometry, the discipline, and the multi-generational secrecy to do exactly the kind of thing we see carved into Oak Island. A shaft dug like the descent of a Masonic initiation. Stone markers set in geometric alignment. A vault protected not by a lock, but by the sea itself, openable only by those who knew the secret. This is a culture that thinks in centuries, that builds cathedrals its founders will never see finished, that hides knowledge inside ritual, so it survives the death of every man who knows it. If any group in history had the means, the motive, and the patience to build the money pit, it was this one. And now look back at what came out of the ground. French lead in the shape of a cross, tied to the very heartland of the Templars. It is as if the builders left a signature. Now, I promised you I would be fair, and I meant it. Because a story this good is exactly the kind of story that human beings love a little too much, and the moment you love a story that much, you stop checking it. So let me make the strongest case against everything I have just told you, honestly, the way a critic would. The sinkhole theory is not stupid. It is, in fact, the position of most professional geologists who have looked at Oak Island. Nova Scotia's bedrock genuinely is soluble limestone and gypsum, which does form natural cavities and vertical collapse shafts. Natural underground channels can connect to the sea and flood a hole with tidewater. Sailors of the era did carry coconut fiber as ship's packing, and it could have washed ashore. And the inscribed stone with its 2 million pound message? It conveniently disappeared and was never independently examined, and its translation traces back to a man promoting the treasure hunt to investors. The curse could be nothing more than a story bolted on after the fact to romanticize a series of ordinary industrial accidents in an era with no safety standards. And it is worth saying plainly, after 230 years and untold millions of dollars, no one has yet lifted a single chest, a single bar, a single confirmed treasure out of that ground. The most likely explanation for a hole that has produced no treasure is that there is no treasure. I take that seriously. Anyone honest has to. And if the story ended there with a natural sinkhole and a lot of wishful thinking, this would be a sad little tale about human obsession, and I would tell you so. But the story does not end there. Because the sinkhole theory, for all its strength, has to explain away not one anomaly, but the whole stack at once. And that is where it starts to break. Ask the sinkhole to explain the finger drains at Smith's Cove, 5 converging hand-built rock channels under an artificial beach. Nature does not lay box drains. Ask it to explain a French Templar region lead cross in the swamp. Nature does not cast metal. Ask it to explain human bone with European and Middle Eastern DNA 100 feet down. Nature does not bury transatlantic travelers in a limestone void. Ask it to explain a scrap of inked parchment pulled from a borehole in the deep fill. Nature does not write. Ask it to explain oak platforms placed at 10-foot intervals with charcoal and putty and imported coconut fiber packed in between. Nature does not lay floors. You can defeat any one of those with coincidence. You cannot defeat all of them with the same word. At some point, the accumulation of coincidence becomes its own kind of proof, and Oak Island crossed that line years ago. The honest conclusion is not, there's nothing there. The honest conclusion is that something was deliberately built into that island by people with medieval-era materials, transoceanic reach, and a genius for hydraulic defense. And they built it to keep something safe for a very, very long time. So the only remaining question, the one that has haunted this island for 230 years, is the one I promised to answer. Not whether something is down there. Here is what the modern hunt has actually converged on, and here is why I told you at the very top that the answer is better than we thought. For most of 2 centuries, everyone was looking for the wrong thing, and it made them miss the truth that was sitting in the evidence the whole time. They were looking for a chest, a pile of coins, pirate gold. And because the island never gave them a chest, they concluded either that the treasure was still just out of reach or that it never existed. But look at what the ground actually surrendered. It did not give up gold. It gave up preservation materials, coconut fiber, putty, charcoal, drainage, the exact toolkit you use to protect something that rots. It gave up parchment. It gave up a religious cross tied to a religious order. It gave up human remains from people who crossed an ocean to be there. Oak Island was never a treasure chest. Oak Island is a vault, a deliberately engineered, tidally defended, multi-level repository built to preserve a collection of objects and documents across the centuries. It is not a hiding place. It is an archive. And that is the twist that reframes everything. The recent seismic and sonar surveys, combined with the drilling, did something no expedition in history had ever managed. They located, deep beneath the original workings, a void, an open cavity in the bedrock, where the drill bit dropped into empty space, and instruments detected a chamber that is not natural in shape. A sealed room, below the flood traps, below the depth that killed 6 men, exactly where 2 centuries of markers and clues were funneling everyone the whole time. The vault is real, and for the first time we know roughly where it is and what it was built to hold. Not coins. A cache of preserved relics and written records, the sacred and secret inheritance of an order that had to run from Europe and needed it to survive the fall of everyone who carried it. Think about why that is better than pirate gold. Gold is just money. If the money pit had been full of Captain Kidd's coins, we would melt it down, split it up, and forget it in a generation. But a sealed medieval archive, hidden by refugees of the most secretive order in European history, marked with a curse to keep the curious away, and defended by the tide itself that is not treasure. That is a message across 700 years, a time capsule of knowledge that people were willing to die to protect and to die trying to reach. Coins would have made a few investors rich. This rewrites the map of who reached North America, and when, and what they were desperate enough to bury here. The value of gold is that everyone agrees what it is worth. The value of what is in that vault is that it could change what we think we know. So, has the Oak Island money pit finally been solved? Here is where the evidence honestly leaves us, and I am not going to overstate it, and I am not going to undersell it. We now know it is man-made, not natural. The finger drains and the platforms and the imported materials settle that. We now know it is medieval old, not merely pirate era. The carbon dates settle that. We now know it was built to preserve, not just to hide the fiber, and the parchment settle that. We now know it points at a specific tradition, the French Templar lead cross, and the Masonic geometry point there. And we now know, for the first time, that there is a real void down there where all the clues converge. The seismic and the drilling found it. 230 years of the biggest question in treasure hunting history, and every one of those pieces has finally clicked into place. The pit is solved in every way that matters, except the last shovelful, reaching in and lifting it out. And that is where the curse gets its final, uncomfortable word. 6 men have died, and the legend says 7. The team on that island today is closer than anyone in history has ever been. They can see the chamber, they know the depth, they have the machines to reach it. All that stands between us and the answer is the flood trap the builders left running and the price the island has always asked. Maybe modern engineering finally cheats the sea and no one else has to pay. But I keep coming back to one thing. Whoever built that vault was clever enough to defend it with the ocean, patient enough to plan across generations, and secretive enough to erase their own names from history. And they still could not stop a 14-year-old boy with a shovel from finding the door. 230 years later, we are standing at the bottom of the stairs they built, looking at the room they sealed, holding the cross they dropped, reading the parchment they buried. The money pit has kept its secret since before this country had a name. And after everything, the deaths, the fortunes, the fraud, the flood, the most incredible part is not that we may finally be about to open it. It is realizing that we were always meant to. They built it to be found, just not by us, and not yet. And when that last platform comes up and the water is finally beaten, whatever is waiting in that chamber will be the answer to a question people have been dying to ask for 2.5 centuries. I don't know about you, but I intend to be watching when they lift the lid.